She laughed when she saw me cutting wood again. "You know that's HOA property, right?" she said, clutching her clipboard like it was a badge of honor. I didn't answer. I smiled, kept stacking my logs, and let the anger simmer under my ribs. That wood came from trees I planted on my land. Still, every morning a few logs disappeared. I didn't need a detective. My security camera had already shown me who was taking them. There she was, Karen, self-appointed neighborhood enforcer, slipping into my yard at midnight and dragging armfuls of my wood away. She even waved at the camera like she was on stage. The next day, I showed her the footage. She only smirked. "You should thank me," she said. "I'm cleaning up your mess before the HOA notices." My jaw tightened. "Don't touch my property again," I said, measured and cold. She laughed and walked off as if she owned the place. That night in the shed, I set my anger aside and focused. I wasn't planning to hurt anyone. I wanted a lesson she wouldn't forget. I prepared a harmless surprise and placed it where she'd take the first logs. Then I waited. At sunset, a shadow moved across the yard. Wood scraped the ground. Then a bright, startling pop filled the night and a cloud of dust and confetti burst into the air. I stepped out with a face of shocked outrage while Karen screamed behind her fence. Her porch lights flickered and she stood there covered in dust, clutching a cracked log. I looked at her and said, "Guess that firewood didn't like being stolen." For the first time, she was speechless. I knew then this was only the beginning. She'd been shamed in front of the block. She'd want revenge, but she had no idea who she'd tripped. The next morning, she was at my gate with 2 HOA board members and a police officer. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling, but she shouted loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "That man tried to kill me. He put explosives in the firewood." The officer's brow went up. "Ma'am, you said you took the wood from his property." Karen straightened her blouse. "It's HOA property. Everything in this block is under our management. He can't just pile wood like a lumberjack." I stepped out calmly with a cup of coffee. "Morning, officer. Want to see the footage before you make any decisions?" Karen froze. "Footage?" I said I had full coverage, including the part where she trespassed at 11:47 p.m. and dragged my pile across the street. Her face drained. The officer looked at her. "Is that true, ma'am?" Karen stammered and accused me of lying, insisting HOA rules allowed it. I cut her off. "This land isn't part of your HOA. It never has been. I bought it 2 years before your association existed." The HOA president, a round man with slicked hair, pushed forward. "Sir, we have documents that say otherwise." I smiled and nodded toward my truck. "Why don't you take those to the county clerk?" He blinked. "Because I work at the county," I said. The silence that followed was sharp. Karen's jaw dropped. I told them I worked in the land management department. Permits, boundary lines, every file. The officer's skepticism melted into a knowing look. "So you handle records," he said. "Exactly," I replied. "And if we're talking about illegal activity, the stealing, trespassing, filing false HOA claims, those are issues." Karen's veneer cracked. "You can't," she began. "I can," I said, stepping closer. "And I will. You crossed the wrong line." She searched the officer's face for help, but he only shrugged. "Ma'am, looks like you may be the one in trouble here." She mouthed that it wasn't over. I sipped my coffee and let her imagine a next move. I wanted her to act. That night I noticed movement by the fence again. 2 figures this time. Karen and a man in a black hoodie with a crowbar. They must have thought the cameras were off after the officer left. I had only pretended to shut them down. Every second streamed to my private cloud. From my dark porch I watched as Karen whispered, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, "Break the lock. We'll plant the sign and take the picture. HOA will have proof he's violating the code." She held a fake HOA eviction notice stamped with a bogus seal, ready to frame me and claim my land through their rules about abandonment. They didn't know I'd planned for this. The gate they tried to pry was rigged with a messy but harmless paint release device from my workshop. The crowbar slipped into the latch and splat. A burst of blue paint soaked them both. Karen screamed and slipped in the mud while the man bolted, leaving her soaked and humiliated. I flipped on the floodlights and stepped out slowly. "Evening, Karen. New color suits you," I said. She stood there dripping paint. "You psycho. I'm calling the cops," she spat. "Perfect," I said. "I'll wait." I held up my phone and showed the live feed of her breaking in. She gasped and threatened to sue for being recorded on her property. I told her she should read the law before pretending to enforce it. Within 10 minutes, police cars arrived. The same officer from before stepped out, took in the scene, and looked at me with a small smile. "Caught her again," he said. I nodded. The other person had fled, but his face was clear on camera. Karen tried to say she'd been forced to come. "He made me do it. I didn't know he'd break the gate." The officer crossed his arms and pointed out the fake eviction notice in her hands. She dropped it, panic flooding her face. She was cornered and it showed. She didn't know one more thing. This wasn't just personal payback. It was part of a larger operation. When the officers questioned her, I told the truth. I wasn't just some county worker with a grudge. I worked with a task unit investigating HOA scams across the state. Karen and her board were already on our radar for fraud, extortion, and fake property claims. I produced my badge. Her eyes widened. "You set me up," she stammered. "No," I said quietly. "You set yourself up." The officer read her rights and placed the cuffs on her while she ranted about running the neighborhood. "Not anymore," he said. By morning, the story spread. The self-appointed president was arrested for fraud and trespassing, and neighbors who had lived in fear finally breathed easier. A few people came by to thank me. I stood by my gate as the last of her HOA signs were taken down and the street settled into a welcome calm. I looked at the empty woodpile and let out a small laugh. "I guess I'll have to start cutting again," I said softly. On this land of my land, no one was going to steal a single thing again. The end.